Big news, y'all. Vercel just gave up on Edge. Not clickbait. I didn't think this day would come, but the more I've thought about it, the more it kind of makes sense. Before we go too deep into this giant Lee Rob tweet, I want to do a little bit of story time. Believe it or not, I actually built one of the first big projects going all in on app router, server components, Vercel, and Edge. And it was Upload Thing. When you navigate Upload Thing, most of those routes are still being served on Edge. They're a regional Edge, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but I know I was first because it didn't really work initially. We filed a bunch of issues and they got fixed the weekend before our launch, which was also the weekend before their big ship week at the time. And it ended up coming out really good. And I've been really happy with the performance we have had on Edge, even though there have been a lot of catches. Random packages not working, random dependencies having weird behaviors we don't expect. Generally, annoying things to deal with as a developer. When you install a package and it works on your machine, and then you ship it out to the server, you expect it to work there. And that's not always been the case when using Edge. There's also weird issues you have to deal with around the size of the bundles that can be shipped to Edge. They're limited to, if I recall, 1 megabyte. As such, a lot of people just kind of want to use Node, but the cold start problem with Node means that it takes a long time to see something. We solved that by moving to Edge. They've solved it different ways. And I want to go over those ways and how we can move past Edge to make sure our users still get the best experience while also making sure that our dev experience is consistent. So yeah, let's take a look at this tweet and then dive in. So Vercel reverted all Edge rendering back to Node.js. We wanted to correct the record here as it's something I've advocated for in the past and share what I've learned since then. Also, the Edge naming has been a bit confusing, so let's clear that up here as well. Oh no. Are we going to start the Edge runtime thing again? Yeah, let's start with that. What is Edge? This question seems very simple. Sadly, it is not. I very much wish I could give you a quick Edge is this, but Edge generally refers to two specific things. Edge location, which is the main one people think of, which is that rather than a server running in a specific location, like if we have the world and we have a random node in this world, we'll say this is West 2. Make the font smaller so this is usable. So we have this West 2 server and we have a user. Make user squares. And this user lives really close to West 2. So I'm located close to the server. I send a request, I get a response. The further away you go, the worse that performance gets. And that's not great, especially if you're waiting to go from like the empty white page of loading to actually seeing your site. This just isn't pleasant. So Edge is the idea that maybe instead of these massive servers, we should have a lot of much smaller ones. So instead we just have these little tiny servers all over the place, like literally thousands of them in thousands of different places. And now your location doesn't really matter because you'll almost always be near one of these solutions. So that's the Edge location, is the idea that your traffic resolves to the thing that's close to you instead of resolving to some crazy faraway server that you have one of somewhere in the world. There's a lot of catches to Edge location, like where is your database? If I'm trying to make a connection to, let's say, I'm in like Australia or some shit, and I connect to this, and it can immediately respond, cool. But what if this has to go to my database? And what if my database is all the way over here? Then this guy has to go to here, that then has to go back. And then finally, you can send the response to the user. This sucks. I want to be very clear. Like, as cool as it is that your server is closer to the user, if your database is somewhere else, the benefits go away very quick. Now you're just adding a hop for almost no reason. There are benefits here though, especially once you introduce things like streaming, because if on this edge, I can start sending a response immediately and then wait for the server to send in the rest using suspense, things get really magical. If you haven't already taken a look at my tutorial, I recommend it. TLDR in my tutorial, it is a super minimal gallery app for taking a look at a bunch of images and uploading them. So if you're curious what I'm referring to here, right now, this whole page will block until all of the images have loaded, because this component renders images, the component, and then images blocks by waiting for get my images. So this whole page comes down as one thing. If I wanted to get the shell and all these other pieces first before images was done, it's actually pretty simple with the new model. You just wrap this component in suspense, and now this becomes a stream. So if I go and actually run and load this, it's not going to load because I don't have my server up anymore. I changed my keys. That's annoying. The key part I'm trying to emphasize here, I can do without actually showing, is that now we don't have to wait for this data to load. We can just render a page and then stream the rest in as part of the same request. So if we go back to my diagram, we get a response immediately from the edge that's close to you. Then we go to the server, we get the rest of the data from our database, come back, and then send that in after. This is honestly most of the win because it doesn't feel too bad to have to wait the like 200 to 800 milliseconds for this database check if you already have content on your page. If the user, when they load the website, immediately sees something and then the rest all comes in smoothly, that is a really overall good experience. Could we theoretically replicate our database all across the world so you get the whole page way quicker? Yeah, but that makes your data story significantly more complex. I have a couple videos about that. Yeah, my why I'm moving off edge video goes deep on why I do and don't think this matters if you want to learn a bit more about it. I don't want to spend this whole time rehashing things I've already talked about with edge. I want to talk about how much it's changed since and why Vercel is moving off. So, we were trying to define edge. Okay, what a tangent. We now know what edge location means, but we haven't talked about what these boxes are actually running, because none of these boxes that are on these edges are running Node, because Node takes a lot longer to start up. Node doesn't isolate processes well. Node isn't a great solution for running a lot of different people's code in one place. So instead, what these tend to use is an edge runtime. That's what they're called within Cloudflare. That's what Vercel has branded theirs. The name's a bit controversial because edge is a location. Runtime is a different thing. You can't just say edge runtime. Well, cars are a thing that's different from chairs, but you could say car seat. If you take a car seat and you remove it from the car, it's still a car seat. It's just the term that we use to describe the thing because of what it was built for. If the chair was built to be in a car, it's a car chair. Even if you take it out of the car, it still is. No offense to all the gamer bros with your shitty office chairs. Anyways, this is why I've gotten into trouble in the past, because my diagram here tried to make it clear that if I have something that's edge and it has a runtime, I need a name for that. So it's been called edge runtime. I will be calling it edge runtime going forward. Flame me in the comments because you're wrong, and if you don't give me a better name, then you're stupid. So we're calling it edge runtime because that's what it is. The edge runtime is an alternative to Node that is designed to be way more minimal, way more isolated, and spin up really quickly. Cloudflare's I forgot the name of Cloudflare's. Is it Workerd is the name of the under the hood name for their runtime, I think? You get the idea. It's meant to be a really minimal way to run JavaScript and have it spin up super quick. So the two things that we care about are the edge location, which is where is the code running, and the edge runtime, which is this running inside of Node or is this running inside of something else? Usually it's going to be running inside of Node, but if we're in the edge, Node is not the best solution because of the cold starts. Because of that, we're looking for something faster. Here's where my spicy take came in. I didn't care a whole lot about where that first request was being resolved from, because the thing I cared a lot more about was the cold starts. So I wanted to eliminate those. So what I ended up doing is I took one of these edge runtime boxes and I limited it to only use the ones near West 2. So I'm still hitting an edge box, but that edge box is not necessarily located near the user because I'm not picking it based on the user's location. I'm picking it based on the database's location because I just want the page to load really fast. And if you go to upload thing, it's pretty stupid how quick things load. Sign in with GitHub, done. Page loads like immediately. I'm clicking files now. And it loads like instantaneously. I'm going to settings now. Like the navigation experience of this is just incredible. And that's because the edge runtime that we picked gets a response out a lot faster because it doesn't have to wait to start up. That said, the biggest place you feel this is navigation. And when you're navigating to the site for the first time, if you have to wait for a cold start that can take sometimes even seconds, it feels like shit. So we need to be able to solve that if we're moving back to Node. And that's the key that I'm looking for in here. How did we end up moving back to Node without hurting the experience users have? Finally, after that long preamble, we're going to actually read the Lee tweet. So what is Edge anyways, at least according to Lee Robb and our friends at Vercel? We have too many products with Edge. I agree. First off, Vercel has an Edge network. A request comes in for your site. The Edge region can go grab some HTML or JS for your site and quickly return it. Great. Yes. We'll touch on this a lot more coming soon. I think people miss the Edge network bit on Vercel, and I think it's important to understand. Then, sometimes, you have routing rules. When the request comes in, redirect it, proxy it somewhere else, or add headers before continuing, like with middleware. You don't need to go all the way back to origin. This is also great. I think people miss how powerful this is. If we go into like your next config in a next project, you can do a lot of crazy stuff here. Like here with these async rewrites, what these are doing is they're rewriting things that go to this URL on our site to usassets.posthog.com. This is so that posthog and other similar things won't get blocked by your ad blocker because they're going through a URL that's on your specific domain. This doesn't have to go all the way back to your Node server that is running your Next.js in a Lambda in order to make this rewrite. They just export this and then run it on the Vercel Edge network. So your code doesn't even run when these get hit. If you put like a console log inside of your middleware or inside of your index.js or something like that, it won't get hit because this is a configuration that Vercel uses to send the traffic where you told them to send it rather than it hitting your service. Very, very powerful. The idea of a config file, not just changing how your code runs, but if your code runs and what your service should do instead of running your code, very powerful. So that's what they're talking about here. Let's keep going though. Sometimes those routing or configuration rules need to be read from a file. We have edge config, which is like reading from a JSON file in every region. Again, still good. Edge config's a bit complex. Fair summary, it's like a way that you can set some JSON, some key values that get persisted across all of your builds so that everything has access to it. Fair. It's like somewhere between a worker KV or like a key value store and environment variables. Edge config is like right in between those two. So what about rendering your application with the edge? Not as great. But Lee, you said, yeah, I gotta admit, this one fooled me. It sounded great at the start. Running close to the visitor makes sense. If I constrain my site to use this limited runtime, and I make the trade-offs for access to the Node.js package ecosystem, I can hypothetically get better performance. This hasn't worked for two reasons. Let me predict before we read any further. It's the ecosystem compatibility, and it is the database being further away. Those are my guesses. Oh yeah. First and most obvious is that your compute needs to be close to your database. Most data is not globally replicated. So running compute in many regions, which all connect to a US East database, makes no sense. I believe many folks understand this, but then maybe this limited runtime was better even if I only run it close to my database. I am doing this. Let's see what they have to say. Well, that was wrong too. We tested it extensively with V0, using the Node.js runtime with one virtual CPU, which is their standard performance option for Vercel functions, has faster startups. Hate to call bullshit on a sponsor, but I want more info on this. I want a lot more info on this. Anyways, are there other reasons for edge rendering? If node functions can be faster, especially with Node 20, what about cost? I expected an edge compute pricing model, which is based on only paying for when your compute runs, and never for I/O, would always be cheaper. I also thought this. This is not the other reason I expected. Very curious. Turns out that was also wrong. It can be cheaper sometimes, but not for all workloads, so some nuance applied here. Same story for security. I wanted edge compute to work, but customers kept telling me they wanted a private connection to other services like Vercel Secure Compute, or they had concerns or no interest in doing global data replication, like data sovereignty. Yeah, the global data replication thing I am very, very skeptical of in general. There's so many weird race conditions and things about like data in different countries and worries about like how long does it take for a delete to persist, and are you breaking the law if it doesn't happen fast enough? Like, yeah, there's a lot to worry about when you're replicating your data across the globe. So what now? It's a good lesson for me to be careful with naming and nuance going forward. Also, networks have gotten really fast. We saw with V0 that it was faster to do SSR plus streaming with Node than edge rendering. I will say V0 might be roughly as like SF pilled as a service can be. I would imagine that a significant percentage of the users of V0, which if you're not familiar, V0 is Vercel's like app code generator where you prompt it with something that you want, like a minimal homepage for a YouTuber. And this will quickly, not super quickly, but surprisingly quickly, generate usable code based on Tailwind, ShadCN, and all the fun tech that I usually recommend for you to copy and yank into your applications. And it is actual like React source code that's totally usable. Exploring the wonderful world of science. It's even making up some funny copy for it and shit. But the code here, if I click code, you can even run this little command to get this installed in your project, or you can just copy the pieces directly if you want to do that instead. Super, super convenient, powerful stuff. I am regularly impressed with V0, but I will say, I can't imagine a more like SF pilled thing. I'd be very surprised if most of the users of V0 weren't at least like US based. So I don't know if this is the best test data, but I trust them. I'm very curious. Okay, this is the first place they mentioned the keyword that I've been looking for, partial pre-rendering. Now we're running V0 with PPR to see if this is better or worse. It's still experimental. The summary of PPR is as follows. User makes a request, the edge region starts streaming back the HTML for the fast initial visual, and then your compute still runs in US East or wherever closest to your data. So far, this has been about 50% faster time to first byte than SSR plus streaming. Pretty amazing. I'll be sharing more on Vercel function improvements soon as well. Yeah, that checks out. I'll say I am surprised that just moving to Node 20 resulted in that level of improvement. My assumption was that they're moving off because of PPR. For those who aren't familiar, I think I have a full video. Yes, if you want to check out my video on this, I published it 5 months ago. Just search partial pre-rendering Theo. You'll find it. I'll give a quick overview, but this is one of my favorite features that I think should have shipped day one with App Router. Let's say you have this beautiful website. This beautiful website has a nav bar, it has a sidebar, and it has all this beautiful content that requires some information that you should fetch from your database. We'll call it Beauty, is the name of our magical, beautiful little site. So I'm going to componentize this to be top nav. I'll call this side nav. And then we have main content. So as I showed you guys before, if we were to wrap main content in a suspense, I'll just write out the whole mock code on the side here. So we have HTML, top nav. We have the top nav. Obviously, this is pseudocode. Don't roast me for not including things you want me to include. Main, side, nav, main content. You get the idea. This is the HTML content, well, the JSX content that we'd have in our React app for actually rendering this content. So this all seems fine so far. But what if main content needs to make a database request that takes a while? Then we can wrap that in suspense. Cool, awesome. But what if this whole thing, just getting this running in the first place, there's so much JavaScript in this app that even getting a response in the first place takes a while? Remember that thing that Lee mentioned about the edge network early on that we didn't go too deep on? This can be used to resolve a lot of things. This can resolve stuff that's in your public folder. So if in public you have like your favicon or some other assets that you're using a lot, those can be resolved via the edge network. You could also put some HTML in there. So let's say on this page that certain sections that I'll label blue here are almost always, if not always, the exact same. So these sections that I've now labeled blue, we'll pretend these are always identical. I'll make their opacity low accordingly. So these both are always the same. Maybe there's some portion in there that isn't. So we'll say like you have a profile picture thing in the corner. So this section is dynamic and it has to be. And this section is dynamic and it has to be. Why are we waiting for all of the JavaScript for all of this to load on the server before we start sending responses back to the user? So like if the user makes a request, then it goes through the edge network. Then it goes to Vercel's lambdas to spin up our code. Then it loads our code. Then it generates a response. Then and only then does it start to send. What if we just stored these parts? What if these things, since they're always the same for every user, were just saved and we sent those initially as everything else spins up, and then we stream the rest in later when it's ready? And that's what partial pre-rendering is. It lets you take these parts that are the same for every user and store them as HTML that gets sent immediately when the user requests, and then the rest comes streamed in later. So it's similar to the like suspense thing I showed earlier, but instead of code loads, first response sent, rest streams in, it's user makes request, immediately gets that first response, and then everything loads and does the rest after. But it lets you make things much, much faster, and you feel like you're navigating the classic static web with really quickly resolving assets from the CDN, because you are. You're getting the benefits of static for the static parts and the benefits of dynamic for the dynamic parts, all running in parallel. It's magic. It runs so fast. And if you can set up PPR and take advantage of these benefits, you almost certainly should. And it's something I've been very excited to do, because if this works the way that it's supposed to for us, I'd have no reason to be staying on edge. So yeah, I personally think PPR is the reason we can start moving off edge. But I'm surprised after reading this to learn that their experience has been just Node 20 being fast enough. That's a very interesting and unexpected thing to learn. So I'm going to be going to play with Node 20 after this. Also, one more small thing I just noticed. Vercel function improvements soon, crab. I wonder what that crab is for. That's all I got on this one. Until next time, peace nerds.